And welcome back, students. We're going to have a slightly shorter lesson than we did yesterday because today we are talking about folders and directories. Now, we're not going to get into a lot of the computer side logistical stuff that goes into it. We're just going to talk about kind of a general overview so you kind of have some understanding of some things with folders and directories and also a little bit of some good practices when we're dealing with those sorts of things. So, getting started here, let's recall that a file, which we talked about in our last lesson, is a single resource for storing information. They come in many different formats, as we saw in our giant battery of them, and are used for many different types of applications. So the question then is, how can we organize those files? Is there a technique that we can use, or is there a way that automatically we can have those files be in a manner accessible for us? And how does the computer organize those files? What does the computer do when it goes and gets a download? Where does it stick that file, for example? All right. So obviously the answer to this is probably folders are going to be a big component of this. Well, a folder, for our purposes, is we're going to use the definition of that it's a directory of where your files, a directory of your files that shows the computer where those files in other folders are kept. Now, folders keep everything on your computer organized, even if you don't normally organize it. Because a lot of times your computer, like let's say you install a program, creates the folders necessary for it. It doesn't just throw everything on the desktop and clutter it up, or throw everything in your documents and clutter it up. No, it organizes it into the appropriate folder. Now, programs that install generally will also install a folder, which will contain all the files needed for that application to run. This is pretty key because this is why they say don't mess with stuff inside of your program files unless you really kind of know what you're doing, because if you corrupt something or you delete something, you could actually prevent that application from working. Now, part of the secret to keeping your computer running efficient is to minimize fragmentation of your hard disk if you're using a traditional HDD. Remember, if you're using a solid-state drive, there's no spinning head, so it doesn't tend to fragment much because it's all electronic data. So it's usually not as much of an issue. However, regardless, organizing the contents of your hard drive into folders helps in aiding your hard drive's ability to recall information because, whether you use solid state or a traditional hard drive, if you have in a folder, it's easier for the computer just to drive down to that folder rather than having to load up, let's say, 200 items. Like if you threw everything on your desktop, well, it's going to have to load everything on your desktop. Where if it's a folder, it can load immediately the folder first and then worry about starting to load the items inside of it later. Now, this can also help you, the user, to find relevant information faster rather than combing through that long list of files. So let's say you just in your documents folder, you just save everything to your documents folder in your computer. And also now you have 200 documents in there. Well, to comb through 200 documents to try to find the one that's what I need would be a bit of a pain. So obviously it's going to be a lot better if you can just, instead of having to comb through 200 documents, put it into maybe, let's say you have like 10 different folders, and I know, well, it's going to be relevant to folder B, so I'm just going to go to folder B, and maybe folder B only has, 20 documents. 20 documents is a whole lot better to have to look through to find something than 200. All right, next let's talk about hierarchy. So in Windows systems, the terms folders and directories are used interchangeably. It has a little different role in Linux and Mac. However, for our purposes, a folder is going to be used to refer to an individual container. So like if I say open up the documents folder, I don't say open up the documents directory. I say the documents folder. Open up your downloads folder. Go to your C drive and open up program files. Open up program files x86. Those are we refer to like yes, it's a directory, but we're in that sense referring to it as a folder, whereas the directory is more of the individual file path. So like saying go to C:// program files. That would be a file path. And that would be, in that case, we're more likely referring to the directory which it's referring to. Though not always. Now, related files, such as the necessary files for a video game, are stored in a folder directory. And this kind of ties back, and remember we said the piece about earlier, it's like if don't go and mess with files inside of a folder for like an application unless you know what you're doing. And this is usually the reason why, because they have everything organized in such a manner that even if you just I don't delete anything, I just move some stuff around, well, that can cause issues too, because a lot of times that stuff is mapped to a specific folder. Now, when a directory is nested inside of another directory, this is what's known as a subdirectory. So let's say you go to your Documents folder on your computer, and inside there you have a folder, let's say for, let's even say your N drive. Go to your N drive and you created a folder for computer apps. Well, your N drive is a directory, and then your computer apps folder would be a subdirectory. Because remember that keyword is, like I always think like submarine goes down, because we're nesting deeper down into something. So the subdirectory in that case would be the computer apps folder. Now, the terms parent and child are used to describe the relation between that of a directory and a subdirectory. So the N drive example that I just gave in the computer apps folder, the N drive would be the parent directory, and then the child would be the computer apps folder. Now, one thing to note is that directories are always going to be parents of directories. It's never the other way around. The parent is always the directory. Subdirectories, therefore, are always the children of the directory that they're part of. Now, key thing there is the directory they're part of. So let's say I have inside my computer apps folder, let's say I had folders for each unit. So let's say I had one for, what is a piece, what is a computer, and one for the internet. Okay, let's say I had one for those two chapters. Well, if I had, let's say, those two chapters there, okay, and I also had another folder, let's say I had a folder for another class. Let's just say it's algebra. Well, obviously the folders inside of computer apps are only children of that computer apps folder, not going to be part of the algebra folder. So that's a quick example of how that works. And one thing to note is the topmost directory in a file system is known as the root directory. All right, so the very, very, very top file that contains everything within your computer on a drive is the root directory. And what's unique about a root is that it has multiple children, multiple children, children below that, and it had all this stuff, but it does not have a parent directory because it is the topmost. There's nothing that comes before it. So therefore, the key thing to remember about root directories is that they do not have a parent. All right, let's discuss a little bit with management of files. Now, obviously, files can easily start taking space in hard drive. Obviously, there's solutions you can come up with this. Okay, I could put it in a network drive, I could put it in Google Drive, I could put it in OneDrive. But ultimately, files can start taking up a lot of space. And you can do different techniques, such as deleting temporary files. If you have a lot of downloads, maybe you can go through your downloads folder and delete all those out. Delete off old files you no longer need. That sort of thing can help with that. Now, one other thing I want to note is that there's a physical limit to the amount of characters you can have in your file path. So, for example, // program file, there's, depending on your operating system, whether it's 32 or 64-bit, there is a finite limit. Obviously, that 32-bit has a smaller limit than that of 64. But either way, it's still regarded as good practice to kind of keep your file names as short if possible, right? And rename them if necessary. All right, and what I say is keep your file name short if possible. So a good example of this, let's say you go find a picture on the internet because you're going to use it for a school project. You decide, I'm going to download that picture so I can have it for later. So you download this picture, and it has this probably really long file name with it. So it's like, image, it's got a bunch of numbers, maybe a couple of descriptors on it. And let's say it's like 200 letters long. That's pretty lengthy. Or even maybe it's not 200 letters long. Maybe it's only like 50. Something ridiculous where it's just a really long file name. Or maybe it's something like image 500px underscore download, something like that. Obviously, if I just have like image 500px underscore download, that may not help me later when I'm trying to find that image. Let's say it was an image of a dog. Well, I could rename it to cute dog.jpg or whatever the file format is, and that would suffice to rename it because, for one thing, it shortens the file name, and it's been renamed because obviously before it had no relevance to me. Because if I go look for it later, unless I remember that it was a image 500px underscore download, I'm going to have no way of trying to find it. I'm going to have to comb through everything until I find it. So renaming it is a very good approach to helping keeping it easier for you to try and find that file later. Now, another thing to talk about here is storing everything on your desktop. This is a bad idea. I know I've come into multiple users who throw a bunch of stuff on their desktop rather than putting like in a documents folder, or they put it on the desktop because it's quick and easy to get to. And there's a certain bit of understandability about that. Of course, you can create like shortcuts and stuff like that if you need to, or you can pin it, but it's considered bad practice. It's actually in the early days of computing, it was something they kind of used because they didn't have the kind of storage that we do now. And it was easier just to have it there on the desktop. But with modern storage methods, it's considered to be pretty archaic to just want to store everything on your desktop. It's also really inefficient on your computer because when your computer loads up, what's one of the first things that loads up? Your desktop. If it has to load your desktop, and let's say you have several gigs of stuff on your desktop in different various folders and stuff, all of a sudden now your computer has to take longer to finish loading up the desktop because it needs to load everything that's there. Or if it's just, let's say, a bunch of icon files, it tends not to take as long. Additionally, one other thing is to make sure you do regular backups. Whether you're backing it up into the cloud, into something like, say, like Google Drive or OneDrive, or you're doing it via physical device. So maybe you have a backup hard drive that you just go periodically back things up to. And this should be done to help prevent data loss in case of the event. Let's say, your computer dies. Your hard drive just decides to give out, or maybe there was a lightning strike and it fried your PC. You don't want to have that data gone, particularly with something you really need. So regular backups are pretty good for that. Right? Additionally, when you're naming a file, and this I already alluded to, keep the file relevant to what you're working on unless specified otherwise. So if you're working on exam paper, you'd sound like Cat 1 file paper. And I already talked about this on the previous slide, but just want to make sure that we hone that point in. All right. Also, as mentioned previously, try to keep that name short, and avoid using characters such as the exclamation point, the @ character, the hashtag or pound sign, or the octothorpe for the really fancy, the $, the caret, ampersand, and star. These are not acceptable file names. In fact, your computer most likely will throw an error or won't save the file at all if you attempt to use these characters because it recognizes them as not valid. And depending on your application, some things might use different things over another, but those characters are generally recognized as not acceptable. And lastly, let's keep your documents organized then within relevant folders, even within, let's say, your documents folder. So, for example, you might have like My Documents, or just Documents, depending on what version of Windows you're using. And nowadays, I think it's just called Documents. So you throw it in Documents, and then you have a folder, let's say, called Schoolwork. Okay, and inside Schoolwork, you have a Word document called Homework. So that's an easy way to kind of help organize with it. Also, you could make Schoolwork a little more specific. You could make it something for that class. You can even have Schoolwork have subfolders. Like Schoolwork could be maybe one for like algebra, and you have one for computers, and one for, let's say, social studies. And then you could have different, files, and maybe even different folders in those too. Because maybe you have one just, maybe instead of algebra, you just have math, and then math, you branch that off into every math you take in your high school career, algebra, geometry, whatever. It's all possible. But that's going to wrap it up for today, folks, and we will see you next time.